Well, folks, welcome to Freedom Friday. I was waiting on the Freedom Friday intro, and we didn't get it that time, but we'll get it next time. But anyway, folks, we're so glad that you're with us. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm glad you're in the house. Glad you're in the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio. And the next 2 hours going to be power-packed and jam-full of amazing information and great guests and great commentary. Listen, let's just jump right into the beginning of this because my first guest is Garth Kant. He is a Washington bureau chief for the online news giant WND, and previously he spent 5 years writing and copy editing and producing at CNN Headline News, 3 years writing, copy editing, and training writers at MSNBC, and also served several local TV newsrooms as a producer, executive producer, and assistant news director. He's the author of the McGraw-Hill textbook, How to Write Television News, and he has just completed, and it has just been released, a brand new book titled Capital Crime, Washington's cover-up of the killing of Miriam Carey. He's done a lot of investigative journalism for WND on this subject. And you know, if you've been listening to Freedom Friday for any length of time at all, you know that I've been talking about this from the day that it happened. Been analyzing it, been reporting on it, been reporting my suspicions about it. And as it turns out, these 3 years later, it's beginning to unravel. Garth Kant has investigated it deeply. He's written this book on it. Others are coming forward now. We have whistleblowers. We've got lawsuits filed. And as it turned out, my original conspiracy theories seem to have legs to them. Garth Kant, thank you so much for being on Freedom Friday. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you, Carl. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, man. Listen, first of all, I appreciate the work that you've done on this with WND over the years. You've stayed right on top of this. You've stayed right with it, even when, you know, people wanted to call you and us and those of us talking about it conspiracy theorist. But, you know, we're used to that. That's what, that's what we do. We dare to challenge the government narrative. You know, shame on us for doing that. And, and we dare to say we're wrong when we're wrong, and we dare to say we're right when we're right. And, of course, the leftists can't stand that. But that's, what journalism used to be. And thank you for doing it. And thank you for writing this new book. Tell folks, first of all, where they can get your stuff, where they can read your articles and go back and get the, the stockpile of your articles, where they can find this book. And then let's jump into this case because this is fascinating.
Sure. Thanks so much. Well, anyone can purchase the book at the WND, which stands for WorldNet Daily Superstore. So I believe that if you just Google WND Superstore, it should take you there, and just look up the title. Similarly, you could see all the reporting I've done on Carey by going to my archives, and you could just Google WND Garth Kant, and that should pop right up. Or if you find any of the stories on our website at WND.com, in each of the stories that I've done on Miriam Carey on the right-hand side, there's a list of all the investigative pieces I've done on that, which I think totals about 40 now.
Right. Yeah, no, I know it's been ubiquitous, and but listen, this case is amazing. Let me just give I'm going to introduce it, and then I'm going to turn you loose.
Sure.
Because you're the one that's been investigating it at that level. But folks, you'll remember Miriam Carey, of course, the young black woman with a small child in the car that had this confrontation, if you will, or actually the police confronted her in front of the Capitol building, and there were barricades. There were some other events going on. I'll let Garth tell you about it. But they wind up, the Capitol City Police, wind up shooting and killing this woman in the car right next to her little child. And either that day or the next day, they get a standing ovation from Congress for a minute as Congress kind of gives them accolades for what heroes they are and how wonderfully they handled the situation. But those of us that were watching that with a, with an investigative eye and with a suspicious eye, we were saying from the beginning, something stinks about this. I was talking to Garth offline, and I'm saying, over the years, where's Jesse Jackson on this? Where's Farrakhan? Where's Sharpton? Where's Black Lives Matter movement now? Where's Obama coming out saying this could have been my daughter? Where's the riots and the lootings and the fires? And the black population of Washington, D.C. is 51%. And this young black woman shot down and killed, murdered in her car by Capitol City Police, and it's crickets, Garth. That's all I'm going to say. You just take it from there and correct anything I said wrong.
No, we can get into all that. Why don't I cover some more of the basics?
Yes.
Which is that this was an unarmed woman who was shot in the back fatally, and the official defense was, the official explanation was that they shot her in self-defense.
Yeah.
There were no charges filed against any of the officers. The Department of Justice came out on July 2014. They didn't present any evidence. They just said there was insufficient evidence to charge the officers. However, they didn't mention that she had committed any crimes. They never accused her of committing any crimes other than traffic violations. What happened is that on October 3rd, 2013, she strapped her 13-month-old daughter into the back of the car and drove from her home in Stamford, Connecticut, to Washington, D.C. Nobody knows why, but it seems evident she was just being a tourist. It was a beautiful day in the lower 70s, just wisps of clouds. It was just a picture postcard perfect.
Yeah.
So she drove up somehow to a White House guard post at 15th and East Streets. And by all appearances, it was a mistake, because the only thing she did when she got there was immediately make a U-turn to try to leave.
Right.
Now, the Secret Service officers, and by the way, it was both Secret Service officers, Uniform Division, and Capitol Police who ended up killing her. Mm-hmm. So when she drove up there, apparently Secret Service wasn't manning the post. They seemed to be asleep at the wheel or something, because she just drove right by this little guard shack. And since there was a fence in front of her, it must have been obvious to her she'd made a wrong turn, because she immediately made a U-turn and tried to leave. Well, it's a crime to try and enter White House grounds, but it's not a crime to try and leave. And that's all she did, was try to leave. Mm-hmm. The police and the media reported that she'd rammed a White House barricade and hit an officer.
Right.
The police had even originally said at the first press conference that shots had potentially been fired at the White House. Now, none of that was true. What happened is, as she tried to leave, an off-duty Secret Service officer who had a cooler under his arm, was wearing shorts and a T-shirt, happened to see the guys at the post banging on her car as she was trying to leave. And he dragged a bicycle rack, or that's what the police report calls it. It's one of those temporary gates. Mm-hmm. And he dragged it in front of her car. He never identified himself as an officer, according to the witnesses.
Oh, wow.
And she tried to drive around it, and he dragged it back in front of her. She nicked the gate, and it swung around and knocked him off his feet. So, why did they chase her? Well, we just on Monday published an account with a Secret Service officer who's come forward as an informant. Who initially was going to give his name, but decided he just was putting too much at risk if he were to do that. But the lawyer for the Carey family, who's a former New York cop himself, has seen the documentation verifying that this guy is who he says he is. And he's friends with the people who were working at that post, and he said they had no inclination to chase her. But they did put out a radio report, and unfortunately, the way it went out, it seems to give the officer hit seems to be the words that were used. And that gives the impression that she had struck an officer, maliciously, that
Sure.
This was, and so I think there was miscommunication that seemed to play a large role in this. The guy who radioed in the report also is adamant that he said there was a child in the car, baby in the car. Mm-hmm. He was very upset the next morning at roll call when officers had claimed they had no idea there was a baby in the car when they shot it up from the back, just narrowly missing the child. So what happens is this radio report goes over, and there are other divisions patrolling in patrol cars, patrolling the White House perimeter. They hear this report, and they get all gung-ho, and they chase her. Mm-hmm. Pretty soon, there's a veritable squadron of cars chasing her, and she arrives at Garfield Circle. And stops her car, and she's surrounded by police, but they do a really poor job of blocking her in, and they're drawing their guns. At this point, it is a little hard to understand why she didn't stop and just surrender. But I'm sure she panicked when that unidentified guy dragged the gate in front of her car, and that's why she left. However, she did not leave at a high rate of speed, according to witnesses. In fact, she even stopped at a red light. Was the first thing she did, according to witnesses in the police report. Why she at Garfield Circle? She did drive up a little onto the sidewalk and then leave. They did a really bad job of blocking her in. Why she did, nobody knows. Nobody knows what her state of mind was. But nonetheless, cops said they shot at her out of fear for their lives.
Right.
They didn't start shooting until she was gone.
Right.
They shot at her from the back.
Right.
So if they're shooting in self-defense, they're shooting at someone who's already left.
Right.
They chase her up to another guard post where barricades are raised, across just a block across from the Supreme Court, in between the Hart Senate office building and the Supreme Court. She gets to a barricade there. She can't go any further, so she backs up, goes over the median, tries to go forward. She can't. There's a cop car, so she starts backing up. There is an officer behind her, but and then shots are fired there, and the fatal shot is delivered there, which is just under her ear from the back and on the side. So the Secret Service officer I spoke with said everybody knew there was a cover-up. This didn't add up. They never should have chased her in the first place because Secret Service rules say that somebody must have committed a felony in order for them to chase them or be suspected of committing a felony. We've published those guidelines. We obtained them through another source. And so there was no legal justification for chasing her. So somebody should have been charged, it seems like. And the fact that the Department of Justice declined to is something we've been investigating. We're actually in court right now, represented by Judicial Watch, trying to get the evidence we need to bring the whole truth to light.
Okay. Listen, Garth, we've got to take a quick time out. When we come back, there's so much more I want to ask you about this. I mean, we're going to talk about why you think, at this point in your investigation, and you've written this amazing book about it, why you think there was such a massive cover-up. I mean, the alternative is let's do an investigation, but apparently that was never done. So let's talk about that on the other side, okay?
Sure.
All right, folks, you're listening to Freedom Friday. You're in the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio. Mallory Bardwell, my world-famous producer, will be back right after this time out. Don't go anywhere.
Are you ready for this?
For mature audiences only.
And now, the Commander-in-Chief is back. Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups, the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio.
All right, welcome back, America. Welcome back to the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio. My guest this afternoon is Garth Kant, and he is the Washington bureau chief for the online news giant WND, and he has just released a brand new book titled Capital Crime, Washington's Cover-Up of the Killing of Miriam Carey. And Garth, you've been reporting on this through WND for years. And what did you say, about probably 10 or 15 articles that you have done, investigative pieces on this so far?
Actually, more like 40.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. Well, okay.
My boss is very, very personally invested in this. He felt much like you described your feelings about it when it initially happened.
Yeah.
It just didn't add up, and Providence happened to be at the scene of the crime.
Yeah, no. You were there?
Yeah.
Talk to us about that. I didn't know that,
Sure.
I don't think.
I was there within minutes of it happening, of the shooting. I was covering a trial at federal court, the 3rd District, which is on Constitution, just below the Capitol Hill West Lawn. And I was just wrapping up my story, and I was in the cafeteria, and I looked out the window, and it's like every cop car in the world went flying by. And this was just 2 weeks after the Navy Yard shooting, and of course terrorism is the first thing your mind comes to. So Washington was already kind of on edge. So I did a quick search on my computer and saw there was one breaking news bulletin that said shots fired at Capitol Hill. And that was most likely taken from a police scanner. Local news would probably pick that up. And so I packed up, rushed out the door, and it was the police tape was just 2 blocks up the street at Louisiana and Constitution. And the first thing I saw was this mangled police cruiser, and then this truckload of soldiers with armed to the teeth drove by, and it's like, what's going on here? And I realized that police cruiser turned out to be one of the cars that was in pursuit and rammed into a barricade. Now, the DHS, which covers Capitol Police protocol for chases, say that they're not supposed to pursue if there's any kind of unsafe conditions. Well, obviously it was so unsafe they almost killed one of their own trying to chase a mother with a baby in the car who was posing no threat to anybody. But anyway, so I walked up to the scene as far as I could go. I knew I wouldn't get anything just by staring at the street. So I started walking towards the lawn and found an officer and asked what had happened. And he said, shots fired, suspect down. I said, killed? He said, down. That's all I knew. Wow. So I called that into my assignment editor, and then I found some witnesses, and they described seeing the chase at Garfield Circle, and I told my assignment editor about that, so we got some first-hand reporting from the scene immediately, and then there was a 2-hour wait for a press conference. Yeah. And that's where the police assured everybody it wasn't terrorism, but they didn't really have any idea what had happened.
But, you know, Garth, listen, so here we are, several years on the other side of it, and here's what we know, as you so beautifully laid out just a few moments ago before going to the break. So Miriam Carey, she simply turned down a wrong road, realized she was in a place she shouldn't be. She made a U-turn to try to leave that area. She did not ram a gate. She did not run over an officer. She didn't break any laws. She had some non-uniform guy in street clothes throwing a barricade in front of her car, probably freaked her out. She didn't break any laws. She was leaving the area where she realized she was in the wrong spot. And what did she get for it? She was shot in the back. She was killed right there with her baby in the car. And then officers later claimed they shot her in self-defense, and Congress gave them a standing ovation. Now, the question is, look, we know that these kinds of things can happen in the heat of the moment. Bad police work. Okay, we get it. But all these years later, where are the voices of the usual characters? Where's Jackson, Farrakhan, Sharpton, Black Lives Matter, etc.? Where is this? Where are the investigations? 51% black population, and nobody peeps about it? What could it be that would have made Jackson and Farrakhan and Sharpton, for example, keep their mouths shut? And where's Black Lives Matter? Do Black Lives really matter? How about a 22-year-old young black woman who was shot in the back? I mean, what's up with this? What do you think's going on, Garth?
Well, I have my suspicions about the silence. I did contact a representative for Al Sharpton and another one for Jesse Jackson, like their personal assistants, and they both had the same reaction. They were like, oh, this is really interesting. Yeah, we've got to get into this. And Jackson's rep told me, look, yeah, he'll definitely want to talk about this. Send me some more information. I sent more information to both of them, and then never heard anything. I sent a couple of follow-up emails. They didn't get back to me. And my suspicion is this, is that when it's a local police department that kills somebody, they can be blamed, and you can ascribe whatever motives to them. In this case, it was the federal police officers. It was the people who protect Obama. It was the people who protect lawmakers. And to blame them for the killing of an innocent life might have been problematic for people such as Sharpton and Jackson, who themselves are somewhat allied with the administration. Black Lives Matter did send a representative to the third annual memorial that I attended the other day. And I asked where they've been, and she said, well, our chapter just started and we've only got 4 people. I said, okay, well, it's something that the major media dropped immediately once
Yeah.
they found out it wasn't terrorism. Then they tried to say she was crazy, and
Yeah, I remember.
she had postpartum depression and had even been hospitalized for it.
Oh well,
and
then she deserved to be killed. Yeah. So
exactly, as the family attorney said, even if she were crazy, that would have been all the more reason not to kill her.
right.
But she went through therapy for that and was fine, and had been fine for a long time. And coworkers just loved her. They said she was absolutely normal, and she loved everybody, and everybody loved her. So, once the media, first said she was a terrorist, then she said she was crazy. When all that proved not to be true, they just dropped it like a hot potato.
Right.
A year later, the Washington Post did do a very good piece on it, and but that was the last. That was the one and only real thing they did. And Mother Jones, a rather leftist paper, did another good one. But
Garth, listen, Garth, I'm going to have to interrupt. I'm sorry, the music's playing. You understand about hard breaks, all the production you've done, but I'm going to have you back because I want to talk about these whistleblowers and the information that's coming forward now, because we've not heard the last of this, right?
No, we've got a lawsuit. We're trying to get the goods.
Okay, we'll get you back very, very soon. Thank you for being with us today. We squeezed you in an empty spot, but I'm going to get you back soon, okay?
Thank you so much.
All right, good deal. Folks, you're listening to Freedom Friday. Carl Gallups, Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio.